Margaret Hollis sent me a fine for my own dock like she was handing down judgment from a mountaintop. Crisp white paper, neat H. OA logo language so formal, it practically expected me to apologize before I finished reading it. According to Margaret, my dock was 10 feet too long out of compliance and costing me $150 plus weekly penalties. The problem was, she had absolutely no legal authority over that dock, and by the time she learned that her whole little kingdom at Pinehurst Lake came apart in public. I bought the cabin in late October after nearly 2 years of looking for a quiet lake place that didn't feel like a trap. I wanted something simple. 2 bedrooms, a wood stove, a porch facing the water, and enough peace to hear the wind in the pines. Most places I looked at were overpriced or wrapped in HOA rules so dense you could feel the headache coming off the page. This one felt clean. Fair price. Same family for 40 years. Small cabin, good bones, and a 40-foot dock with a covered slip at the end. I'm a surveyor. My whole working life revolves around lines, records, dates, measurements, and legal language most people don't bother reading. So when I bought the place, I had my real estate attorney review everything, then filed every document carefully. HOA fee was $62 a month. Roads, common areas, boat launch, nothing unusual. The first few months were exactly what I wanted. Winter weekends were quiet. I fixed a porch railing, replaced 2 fogged windows, and swapped out 3 soft boards on the dock. By March, more neighbors started showing up again. Most were decent. Harold Henderson, an older guy a couple lots down, warned me about Margaret over coffee one afternoon. He said she'd run the HOA for 11 years, fined all kinds of people, and treated rules like Holy Scripture. Still, I wasn't worried. I'd read the bylaws. Lawn height, paint colors, noise boat storage, all the usual small power nonsense. None of it touched me. So when spring came, I launched my fishing boat, tied it to my dock, sat out there with coffee, watching evenings settle over the water, and thought, this is exactly why I bought this place. Then Margaret's letter arrived. She said my dock violated HOA Section 7, subsection C, because it exceeded the approved 30-foot limit. She measured it at 40 feet and fined me $150. I didn't call her. I went inside, opened my file box, and pulled the deed. Buried near the bottom of the 1974 deed was a 7-line clause stating that the property conveyed all riparian rights associated with the shoreline, including the existing dock and any improvements, and that those rights were not subject to restriction by any homeowners association formed after the deed's original recordation. I read it 4 times, then checked the HOA incorporation date. 14 years too late. I laughed right there in my kitchen. Margaret had fined me for a structure her organization had no authority to regulate. The original 1969 subdivision plat showed my lot with riparian rights and an existing dock already noted. So I wrote Margaret a short, calm response, acknowledged her notice, cited the deed, cited the dates declined to pay, invited her to pursue proper legal channels if she disagreed. Certified mail. Copy kept. A reasonable person would have backed off. Margaret sent a second letter. Sharper tone, bigger threats, more penalties, same bad argument. She hadn't checked the deed or the plat. She just pushed harder. That's when I called Robert Kane, a property attorney I'd worked with before. He reviewed the documents and confirmed the dock rights were protected. The HOA couldn't retroactively regulate them, and if they tried formal enforcement, they'd lose. That should have ended it too. Instead, the full HOA board sent me a letter claiming the boards I'd replaced counted as an unauthorized modification. My fines had increased, and if I didn't pay, they reserved the right to place a lien on my property. That was the moment that the whole thing changed. A fine is annoying. A lien is war. Robert sent a formal letter laying out the deed history, the 14-year gap, the protected rights, and the legal consequences of filing a wrongful lien. Margaret's answer wasn't to hire a lawyer. She called the county zoning office and tried to get my dock flagged that way. An inspector came out, left a notice. I called the county the next morning. Clean record, no violations. Then I asked if there was permit history on the dock. There was a 1971 county permit for a permanent permitted structure, 40 feet long, 8 feet wide, covered slip at the end. Exact match. By then, the folder had turned into a binder. I organized everything chronologically and started keeping a written log. Every letter, every call, every conversation, every escalation. Tedious, sure, but records get louder the longer nonsense continues. Then Harold called and told me Margaret had been talking at an HOA cookout, telling neighbors I was refusing to cooperate, that I'd hired an aggressive lawyer, that my dock was creating liability for the whole community. None of it was true. I asked Harold if he'd write down what he heard. He did. That same weekend, I started photographing docks around the lake from public access points. And that's when I found the twist that made me sit back and grin. Margaret Hollis's own dock measured 38 feet. I checked it 3 times. 38 feet. The woman fining me for an oversized dock had one herself. And once I started looking harder, I found more other oversized docks, including board members' docks. Selective enforcement, plain as day. I kept that to myself. A week later, Margaret called a special HOA meeting about waterfront compliance and community standards. Translation: public pressure and folding chairs. I went, sat in the back, and brought my binder. She got up there talking about resistance to authority, protecting property values, consistent standards, all that polished HOA language people use when they want control to sound noble. Then she opened the floor. I stood up and held up 3 documents. The 1974 deed, the county zoning clearance, Robert's legal opinion. I explained calmly that my deed protected the dock, that the county had found no violation, and that any lien action would expose the board to a wrongful lien claim. Then I sat down. The room went quiet. A woman near the front asked Margaret whether the board had consulted a lawyer before issuing fines. Margaret dodged. The woman asked again. Same dodge. Then a man asked whether all docks were being measured equally. Margaret said violations were enforced as identified. You could feel the room shift. 2 weeks later, the board filed the lien anyway. That was their fatal mistake. Robert challenged it immediately and prepared the wrongful lien action. While he handled the legal side, I finished one last piece of documentation, a full measurement record of 14 visible docks around Pinarest Lake. 9 exceeded the HOA's 30-foot limit. 4 of the 5 board members had non-compliant docks. Margaret's was 38 feet. Not one of them had ever been fined. Then the lawsuit was filed and Public Record did the rest. A local property rights blog picked it up. Neighbors started asking questions. Margaret posted some defensive message about protecting property values, but she still wouldn't answer the real questions. Then came the second twist. Gary, another lake neighbor, called me after pulling his own deed. 2 years earlier, the HOA had fined him $420 for an unapproved dock extension. He'd paid it without a fight. Now his own lawyer was telling him his rights likely predated the HOA too. Gary filed a reimbursement demand and a complaint with the county HOA regulatory office. Then 2 more neighbors filed similar complaints. Suddenly, this wasn't just Margaret versus me, it was a pattern. By the time we got to court, the HOA had finally hired a lawyer 11 days before the hearing. Too late. Robert walked the judge through the timeline: 1969 plat, 1971 permit, 1974 deed, 1988 HOA incorporation, written notice to the board, legal warning lien, anyway. Then the judge asked the HOA attorney the one question that mattered: had any lawyer reviewed the deed before the fines or the lien were issued? No. That courtroom got so quiet you could hear papers settle. Judge Patricia Wren ruled from the bench. The dock rights were protected. The HOA could not retroactively regulate them. The lien was wrongful. The fines were unenforceable. She ordered the lien removed, vacated the fines, awarded me full legal fees, $11,040, and issued a permanent cease and desist prohibiting the HOA from future enforcement action against my dock. Then she referred the broader matter to the county HOA regulatory office because the record suggested a pattern of enforcement without legal foundation. 6 weeks later, the county review came back. 7 cases of fines without proper legal basis. Lien threats used as pressure. Reimbursements ordered. Gary got his money back. Margaret resigned 4 days later. 2 board members followed her that same week. Another quit 10 days later. The whole group that had signed those letters and filed that lien vanished almost overnight. New elections were held. Harold won a seat. Gary won a seat. So did the woman who had calmly asked whether Margaret had ever consulted a lawyer. The first thing the new board did was commission a deed review of the whole subdivision. 11 properties had rights the old bylaws couldn't legally touch. And that, to me, was the real ending. Not the courtroom, not even the legal fees. It was the moment the lake stopped running on assumptions and started running on facts. These days, I still drive up most weekends. I still carry coffee down to that same 40-foot dock before sunrise. The 3 boards Margaret tried to find me over have weathered in now and blend right into the rest of the wood. The lake is quiet again. And every now and then I think about what really happened. Margaret didn't lose because I was some genius. She lost because she'd gone unchallenged for so long that she confused tolerance with legitimacy. A lot of people who abuse procedural power aren't masterminds. They're just loud, organized, and used to people giving in. They count on official-looking letters, tired homeowners, and the fact that most folks would rather pay than question. The hard truth I took from it is simple. Power gets sloppy when nobody checks the paperwork. I checked mine, then other people checked theirs. So let me ask you this, when somebody hides behind rules, official language, and community standards, where's the line between keeping order and abusing power? And if you've ever dealt with an HOA, a property dispute, or some self-appointed ruler with too much confidence and just enough paperwork to scare people, tell me your story in the comments. Do you think this was justice or just karma finally catching up? Finally.